I would like to discuss some recent articles that are coming out from the Society of St. Pius X and from Bishop Richard Williamson. The first is one on what does the United Nations want from the Catholic Church. Actually, it's what they want from the Conciliar Church. I would like to go into one little point they put in here because I had not seen this quote put in this context. Asked by a journalist what he intended to do about homosexuality in the priesthood, Pope Francis replied, "If a person is gay and seeks God and his good will, who am I to judge?" Do we want homosexuals in the priesthood? I don't think so. That's a very difficult statement. And then I was just sent an article by a friend this morning. Pope Francis is calling a Protestant a, quote, brother bishop. This Protestant has taken many people away from Francis's conciliar church, but he seems to have no problem with it. In fact, they've been good friends from way back in Argentina. A Protestant is not a brother bishop. He's a heretic. In fact, neither one of these two men are bishops. That's another story. This gets down to what's going on. The Society of St. Pius X sent out an email to their regular email list, linking up two articles condemning Sedevacantism. And with that quote and those quotes here, one can see why people are thinking about Sedevacantism again. Let's face it, every time George Bergoglio opens his mouth, out comes something that people don't like. If you're Catholic, that is. And it's just getting worse and worse. The first article is Sedevacantism Catholic? I'm not going to waste my time going through this and refuting its points. Basically, it's a ton of quotes taken from other books, just cobbled together. Some subjects are not taken in depth. Some they're giving a historical opinion, an opinion which is not shared by other historians, and in fact, in one case, an opinion not even shared by St. Robert Cardinal Bellarmine, but it kind of rattles on. Not very important. The next one is concerning a Sedevacantist thesis. This one is also off point. It's a little bit more dangerous. Basically, it is a refutation of the Cassiacum thesis of Father Gerard de Laurier, later a took bishop. And somewhere in here they say that they don't understand his Cassiacum thesis. It's a big muddle. I tend to agree myself. I consider the Cassiacum thesis is just another shade of the Society's position and practice. They both believe that now Pope Francis must convert for the church to come back on course. Again, I'm not going to refute this one here because I'm going to instead go into what do we really believe, because Sedevacantism and conclavism do have to start with the same basis. We have to declare the papacy vacant. The papacy must be vacant or else conclave cannot be held. So we put that aside. Bishop Richard Williamson has written two of his lays comments recently and against Sedevacantism, and now he's in the middle of a series on infallibility. I just read one of those a few days ago, and I'm not sure what the heck he's even trying to say. Bishop Donald Sanborn, who supposedly supports the Cassiacum thesis, has an admirable refutation of Bishop Richard Williamson's recent allays on comments. Basically, it's entitled Response to Bishop Williamson. It's a PDF file. I do not have the URL. But we must give praise to these men, even though I disagree with Bishop Sanborn on many points. He has gotten a few things right on occasion, and these men do write some very good articles. And so, let's rather follow the example of Father Cicada. I saw a video of his a few weeks back. I think it was when I was down with the flu. I wasn't up to really doing much of anything, so I was watching a couple videos. And he's trying to say, how do I explain the Sedevacantism to Aunt Helen? In other words, what's a simple explanation of why I believe the papacy is vacant? And this is where the society gets off. Bishop Williamson gets off. First of all, they say, this is what Sedevacantists believe. And they get it wrong. And the one article from the Society concerning a Sedevacantist thesis, they're acting as if Bishop Gerard de Laurier in 1977 was the first to propose Sedevacantism, and then before he went off into his Cassiacum thing. He wasn't. A year early, Fathers Sainz Arriaga, Moises Carmona, and Adolfo Zamora, in May of 1976 in Houston, Texas, visited with Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre to discuss not only the vacancy of the papacy, but the necessity of electing a pope. Father Sainz died 2 months later in Houston, Texas. I kind of wonder what happened there, but that's another story. The thing is, the idea of the vacancy of the papacy goes long before Gerard de Laurier. As Father Cicada said, all of us in the early 70s were implicit Sedevacantists. We may not have worked things out, but we asked some basic questions. Before I sat down to this video, I was eating my breakfast. I thought, I'm just going to write down my points. Simply. The first question we have to ask ourselves, and this is what we were asking ourselves in the early 70s, how can a true pope give us a bastard mass? Archbishop Lefebvre called the Novus Ordo a bastard mass. You can go Google, quote, bastard mass, Lefebvre. You're going to find the quote, I think it might have been the Mass at Lille. But they translate it that way, and that's what he said. And let's face it, a lot of us said, go get him, Marcel, because we believe the Novus Ordo was a bastard, but not a mass. How can a true pope give us that? And then we go a step further. When you study the Vatican II documents some, how can a Catholic council declare that Allah, the God of Islam, is the true God? And it's in 2 documents of Vatican II. Don't give me this pastoral council garbage, whatever. This was an ecumenical council. Upstairs in Canon Law Digest, I've got a copy of the decree calling for the Second Ecumenical Council of the Vatican. But even if it were a pastoral council, quote, the Pope and bishops were there. Could such a council teach such rank heresy as that Allah is God? And see, these are only 2 points. I mean, I could sit here and go over the invalidity of the new sacraments and all these other points, which I've done elsewhere. But we're seeing all these things stack up, and we say, this cannot come from the Catholic Church. And that was Father Cicada's point in his video, and I think he has an article on it as well. Both are excellent when he's discussing this part of the subject. It's quite simple. The Vatican II Church is not the Catholic Church. It should be obvious. You know, when they got dancing in the aisles and a few things, which are more obvious, but then we get into their theology, whatever. So, Paul VI and the bishops are heretics. That is without question. Paul VI signed those 2 documents in officially on behalf of Vatican II. Most of the bishops signed. Now, true, some like Archbishop Lefebvre didn't sign some of these documents. Their silence at the time would be sufficient to give consent to heresy in my book. But the majority of the bishops and Paul VI left the Catholic Church because of heresy. And you say, well, how do I know this? It's simple. Heretics aren't Catholic. They are eventually excommunicated, normally, but they don't have to be. There are heretics that have never been excommunicated, either because their heresy was in a small place or whatever, not well known. But they're still not Catholics. And here's where we get down to the law. The law on this is really quite simple. We deal with the 1917 Code of Canon Law. We can reject the 1983 Code for two reasons. The first, it comes from non-Catholics, but the second, and more important, is the incidents we are discussing came before 1983. The law in force was the 1917 Code. We go to Canon 188, paragraph 4, which states that heretics resign all offices in the church by the act of heresy without any need of declaration. Ipso facto, by the very fact they commit heresy, I resign. That's what they do. Yes, there are 8 paragraphs, and it's like taking an incompatible office or whatever. Heresy is ipso facto resignation, which is accepted by operation of law by the church itself without any need of declaration. This is very simple. It's a simple principle. It was in the Code of Canon Law. What is interesting, when the few canonists who discuss whether or not a pope can become a heretic after 1917 all discuss it under the canon which discusses that a pope can resign at any time he wishes, which would bring in the application of 188 paragraph 4. That's simple logic. A heretic leaves the church. As St. Robert Bellman says, how can a man be head of the church who's not even a member of the darn church? I mean, this is not rocket science, folks. And that's why these articles have to get so dang complicated. Because if we complicate things, maybe we can confuse people. The faith should be simple. Don't we study a simple basic catechism? True, theologians will go into great depth. But when it gets right down to it, the truths of the faith are very simple. You can understand it, I can understand it, we can teach it to a 7-year-old child. As they get older, we expand on things, obviously. But we get to an adult with a basic grade school education can understand what I'm telling you today. Grade school. Doesn't have to be high school. Let's face it, children might take a look and they say, what is this Cassiacum thesis? And what is this study stuff the Society of St. Pius X saying? A heretic's not a Catholic. Can't be Pope. The other argument that's put forward is that cum ex apostolatus officio was not retained in the 1917 Code of Canon Law. First of all, Cardinal Gaspari drew up a book which is called the Fontes of the Code of Canon Law. It's in Latin. It's like 4 or 5 volumes, whatever. And for each canon, he puts down the supporting decrees from before 1917. Under Canon 188, paragraph 4, among other places dealing with heresy, is cited cum ex apostolatus officio. Canon 6 tells us that in interpreting canon law, we are to use the same interpretation as the old law if the law remains unchanged, which many of them did. And so, if the law says the same thing as was before the 1917 Code, then the interpretation has been held, carries forward. Further, Canon 6 provides that if there is no law concerning a matter, if we're looking for guidance, we have recourse to the old law. Now, cum ex apostolatus officio covers something that's not covered in the Code of Canon Law. One may ask why today, but when you look at the time when the Code was written, you can understand why they did not deal with what would happen if a heretic tried to obtain an office in the church. Why would you put this in the Code of Canon Law when you don't think it's going to happen? Well, they didn't. And so where do we go? We go to the old law. What's the old law? Cum ex apostolatus officio, and it is quite clear. It states that if an apostate, a heretic, or a schismatic attempt to attain an office in the church, or they are elected or appointed in whatever manner, the appointment, election, is absolutely invalid and has no trace of validity whatsoever. And this blows away the Cassiacum thesis, which holds that Francis is materially Pope or not formally Pope or whatever. That he has some claim and that his claim impedes filling the vacancy. It's quite simple. A heretic cannot become pope. He cannot become a cardinal. He cannot become bishop of a diocese. Oh, true. You lay hands on his head, he'll be validly ordained priest, he'll be validly consecrated bishop. But he cannot obtain an office in the Catholic Church because he's not a member. Cum ex is clear. These are not difficult words, and it is retained in the Code of Canon Law because there is no provision concerning the affair. And this is the argument. It was first put forward in 1982. Post-election heresy is proof of pre-election heresy. What this one man put forward is that if we see someone instituting bastard masses and telling us all is God and all this stuff, who is Pope, that it's quite likely that prior to his apparent election as Pope, he had committed heresy. So the next step is you just simply go back and look. Did Paul VI commit heresy before he was apparently elected as Paul VI? And the answer is yes. It's proven and will the Catholic Church survive the 20th century? It's on my website somewhere, I believe. The information is out there of pre-election heresy on both Angelo Roncalli and Giovanni Battista Montini. Proof was put up about Carol Wojtyła and Joseph Ratzinger. I think there's a little bit up about George Bergoglio, and Luciani wasn't in long enough for anyone really to do any research because he was in and out. But there's another point to be made here. Okay, let's say there was some confusion about exactly how and when Paul VI, whether he became Pope or whether he ceased to be Pope, because I mean there were, especially in the 70s and early 80s, there was a debate about when it happened, how it happened. And people believed it did happen. Okay. Some would say when he signed the Allah is God document. Others say institution novus or whatever. There are consequences of a vacant papacy. An antipope cannot appoint true cardinals, especially a heretical antipope. Now, by the time you get to, actually between 58 and 63, Angelo Roncalli, as Antipope John XXIII, appointed so many cardinals, he loaded the ballot box in 63 that election could not be valid according to canon law because so many non-members of the College of Cardinals participated. But then you go from 63 clear to 78. Paul VI, in my book, if he ever had a claimed pope, which I don't think he did, and in fact, by pre-election heresy, I'm sure he didn't. But let's just say he had a claim up until the end of Vatican II at 65, when the Allah is God document is signed. I think the end of 65, both those documents were signed by Paul VI. Okay, let's say the papacy became vacant at the end of 65. You go from 65 to 78, that's 13 years. 13 years, and he's appointing non-cardinals. He's loading the ballot box. Plus, how many cardinals signed the Allah is God document? How many celebrated the Bastard Novus Ordo Mass, which I consider as a heretical act? Okay? These men had all deserted. You get to 78, you go into that conclave, there are no Catholics in there. So there are no cardinals in there. Now some argue, well, you can't judge the Pope. True statement. Doctrine of the faith. I'm not going to argue against that one. Thing is, we're not judging the Pope in the 78 election. We're judging whether or not a group of men who appear to be non-Catholics are indeed non-Catholics, rather than the Catholics they claim to be. And it's a simple point. I mean, they were celebrating the Novus Ordo. Okay? That's how they buried Montini. That's how they buried Luciani. There were no cardinals in that conclave. Therefore, the conclave was not capable of electing a pope in 78. That invalidates Luciani, Wojtyła. The same argument moves forward to Ratzinger and Bergoglio. I mean, even if you could find some argument that Paul VI was pope for a time, or even if you say, well, we can't judge the pope, so we'll consider him in all the way to 78. There were no cardinals to elect in 78 because they had all defected from the divine and Catholic faith. It's very simple, folks. And people are not pulling out these things which the simple faithful are saying, hey, Catholics don't give us this garbage. Therefore, they're not popes, they're not cardinals, they're not our bishops, they're not our pastors. And we walk down the road. Just like if someone put a Baptist preacher into our church, we're either going to throw him out or we're going to get out if we can't throw him out. Because we're not Baptists, we're Catholics. It is very simple. What happens is the Society of St. Pius X and Bishop Williamson going right along with it are complicating matters. And this is wrong. Well, God bless you, and I've taken quite a while going over this. If people want, I will write up a refutation of this garbage and start pulling out some of their quotes and show them where they're off. A lot of it, I think, has already been done either by myself or by others. So, if you have any questions, send them in here. God bless y'all.